Most people avoid failure. Barry Walton followed it through school, work projects, empty cities, and uncomfortable truths. In this episode, we talk about the silence of lockdowns, the weight of conformity, and the kind of questions that don't come with easy answers.
Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world.
Are you ready to create real change in your leadership, your career, your life? Join me for a complimentary Lead and Thrive session, a 60-minute one-on-one strategy session where we will discuss your specific needs and map out the next steps to lead yourself and others powerfully. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Visit transformyourperformance.com/Lead Thrive session to book your Lead and Thrive session today. Let's work together to make it happen. Welcome to Rise to Lead. With me today is Barry Walton, an Emmy Award-winning producer and author. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Regina, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk to you. I think you and I have some amazing stuff in common and similar interests, and I'm looking forward to connecting with your audience.
Yeah, it's so great to have you on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So for those of you listening who are not familiar with Barry's work, Barry Walton is an Emmy Award-winning producer and author whose work spans documentary, commercial, and narrative storytelling. As the founder of Endless Media, he spent his career bringing impactful stories to life for brands, sports franchises, and networks like Fox Sports and IPG media brands. His documentary and branded content have earned multiple industry accolades, including the Golden Matrix Award. And aren't we all living in a matrix? As an author, Barry has published 2 books, Empty America, a title that resonates so much with me. We're going to talk more about that. So Empty America, a haunting exploration of the US during the first global pandemic, and his latest, The Unknown Adventurer, a deeply personal journey that explores love, God, philosophy, and life's biggest questions. Barry's work, whether on screen or on the page, is driven by a commitment to truth, curiosity, and storytelling that connects us to something greater. Barry, before we dive into leadership and personal leadership and all those exciting topics and your documentaries, what is your story and what shaped you or shaped who you are now, and what brought you to this moment in your life?
Well, first off, that was an incredible introduction. I'm completely in awe of all those amazing things you said about me, and I think you're right when you say, I focus on truth and just being honest and kind of processing what I see and speaking about it. In the process of speaking about it and trading ideas freely without criticism, without fear of external forces is really the only way to come to truth, because I might have a part of truth. I might understand part of it, and you might introduce something that helps me kind of get closer to it. And I think that's what this conversation is today, I hope, about. And, so for me, a little bit about my story. I grew up in a small town in Michigan. The town's name was Medina, Michigan. It had maybe 300 people in it. I was a country boy, and
Same
I
as
was
I.
just I loved it. I loved the country. My mom was a farmer. She grew up on a farm, and we had animals and livestock, and we had fields behind our house, and I
Me
spent
too.
I know, and I spent my summers exploring. So for me, I came into kind of the world I think in a unique way, because so many people have migrated to the cities in the past 50 years, that that allowed me to kind of look at it from maybe a slightly different angle. You know, I was very open and honest. The world was very open and honest, and I wasn't engaged in kind of any political forums of life. My dad was a working class dad. He showed up at a factory. He did his job. He came home. My mom used to drive school bus and drive us to school and back every day, and that's kind of how life was. You know, but I was a dreamer, you know, and the advent of the television, which by the time I was a kid was pretty far along in its process, inspired a lot of dreams, inspired adventure, and I wanted to see more of the world. And in my early 20s, I went out to Los Angeles and tried to make my mark in the film industry, like so many kids. I remember reading a statistic when I was and this is probably 20 years ago now, but I remember reading a statistic when I first moved out there, and it said something to the effect of, you know, somewhere upwards of 70,000 new individuals, probably mostly kids my age, came to LA. I think it was weekly, maybe monthly, maybe daily. That seems like a high number. And basically trying to make their mark on Hollywood, you know, and some would get flushed out, some wouldn't. I made my run there for 5 years. I had some pretty good experience. I got to work around. I got to be on sets with Will Smith, Jennifer Lopez, Jennifer Love Hewitt. All these names were at the end of the 90s when I was doing it. All those names were really relevant. They're still relevant today, but they were at the top of their game kind of when I was doing it. And I had actually I had some fun stories where I had interacted with Jennifer Lopez and Will Smith, and I'll save those for another time, but only to add validity to kind of my experience and my work history. And that kind of began to drove me. But for me, the corporate nature of working in commercials, not films, but commercials, was unattractive. And finally, I found my way after some moves in life to working in national TV. I was producing shows for Animal Planet and Nat Geo, and I discovered and fell in love with the process of documentary films. And shortly after that, I made my first documentary film of a friend of mine who ran an ultra marathon in Hawaii, and then ultimately that led me to a documentary in the Himalayas, capturing people running over the two highest mountain passes in the world, in Kardungla and Dunglangla, outside of Leh in the region of Ladakh, north of India. And so that process of documentaries, what I loved about it was trying to tell an honest story. And I even had, you know, on this topic that we're going to get deeper into, of kind of speaking your truth, speaking not your truth, because individuals don't own truth. That was a term from the 90s. I remember hearing people start saying in late 90s and early 2000s, my truth, my truth. This is a term that people like to use, my truth. There is no such thing as my truth. There is the truth that we collectively decide on, but you don't get to own truth. Truth isn't something that you have ownership of and you can manipulate to your will. Truth is external of you, but not sidetracking, getting into documentary films, telling those stories, getting down to the truth of what happened. And in my documentary that I mentioned in the Himalayas, some people almost died. There was a lot of conflict. The race director had kind of pushed athletes maybe too far. And even in that, it was hard to tell the truth. I was afraid to tell the truth because people who I had connected with, the friends that I was filming, the people that I were filming had mistakenly both become friends and characters. I was in conflict to tell the true and full story, which was my first big lesson in documentary filmmaking, of the importance of not getting too close to your subjects. But that's a little quick synopsis and trajectory of my history, my love of documentary film, and my desire to get down to the truth inside of a story.
Okay, there are so many nuggets in this. So I'm going to pick up a few. First of all, we have a lot of common about our early years, actually, because I grew up in a small village with 10 houses, so even smaller than your town, on a small farm. And yes, I was also very curious about the world, and that's what eventually pushed me out into the world, right? I have this adventurous spirit. You talked about adventure and about documenting adventure, and we had a lot of that in our family on my dad's side. So we could have used you as a documentary,
Oh, I
you
would
know.
love to. Well, I can come back and tell. I mean, I love going in, exploring the unknown and going out
Right.
into the wild. So I'm with you.
Yeah, yeah. One of our family members actually, he eventually passed away in Egypt, but he traveled up the Nile from beginning to end, from south
Wow.
to north by himself in a boat. So just as an
Wow.
example, and there is a documentary now, but anyway. So
That's
yeah,
fascinating. I would love to see that documentary.
yeah, it's only been shown at festivals because of the rights of some of the materials, but yeah, I saw it actually at some point. Yes, so and of course, yeah, you mentioned Hollywood. We know that Hollywood these days is in the news for not so great things sometimes, and even also the people you mentioned, might be somewhere in that what do you want to call it, meshed up in that whole story. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole here. Now, you mentioned truth and that it's something external. So I wanted to come back to that a little bit because, of course, that is another rabbit hole, right? We could talk about this all day long and what truth really is. So I thought that was an interesting point of view that you presented here. And we could of course argue whether there's anything external to us, but I think I understood what you mean, that it's not just up to us to decide what is going on, right? Is that more or less what you meant?
No, yes and no. I mean,
Mhm.
it sounds like we could have a good debate. And and I love what Jordan Peterson says when he speaks of how people process thoughts and memories. And it relates to this in this sense. When two people come together like we are, we're taking our thoughts out, not literally, but verbally, and we're setting them on a table, a metaphorical table between the two of us. And we're pointing at those thoughts and we're parsing out things that we think are accurate and things that might not be accurate. And then we're taking those thoughts after the conversation, putting them back in, basically defragmenting, which is a term used for computers when you clean out memory, and cleaning up those thoughts. And most often, you come away with a different perspective on your own story. And maybe you even change the story. There's what I love about there's a famous quote that says, if you're brave enough to listen, you might actually change. That's why listening is so hard for so many people. It's actually scary because you might actually change. All that being said, when it comes to kind of this topic of external truth and internal, I definitely believe that truth is external in a sense. And here's why I think it's important to, and this the premise of that is because it means that we have to commune together to come to a resolution. It means that we can't live isolated within our own ideologies, and that our ideologies and our thoughts and what we perceive to be true has to be tested against the reality. And reality is external from the self, right? So why I believe that truth is not something that we own. It's something we share. It's a communal thing. And it's designed that way because humans do best when they have to work together. The worst case scenario is, and this is this is authoritarianism. Can you help me with this pronunciation? Author.
Authoritarianism, or
Thank you, thank you. Authoritarianism, and you see this in a sense in Maoist China, where a small group of people make the choices for everyone because they live within a bubble that the rest of culture cannot relate with. We're best when we are forced to put our ideas into culture and see what comes back to us, and then adjust. And so for me, that's my point of view on that. I think that we can be inspired internally. We can have a sense of truth. But if that truth isn't tested against the community, against the reality of the world, which is external, I would argue that that truth has gaps, and it would make it a false truth. That's just my
I'm
opinion.
so glad I asked, because it's much clearer now to me, and probably also to other people, what exactly you said there earlier. So thank you for that. Yes. So I'm curious, you shared your story before. Was there any moment in that story where you feel like you failed? Failure has such a bad reputation, but how did you have such a moment? And if so, how did you personally reframe that failure? And what is that mindset shift, if there was one? What did that do for you?
My whole life is full of failure. Arguably, my foundation was built on failure. And we talked a little bit about leadership and kind of developing skills of leadership, and and kind of in passing those on to your audience, which is another big piece that I hope to convey.
Mhm.
But in the third grade, and at a young age in elementary, I failed. I failed the third grade. They held me back. Now, as an adult, this seems like inconsequential. But as a child, it was a huge deal because you're a little fish in a little pond, and all of a sudden, everyone that's in your pond got to go to the next pond, and you had to stay. And the other little fish came in the pond with you, right? So I watched my peers go on, and I stayed. And that built an impression upon me that I was not capable. I was not capable. That's became a narrative that I began to repeat. And I lived that narrative all the way into my mid 20s, when I came to the realization that if I maintain this narrative of failure every time I come to hardship, that I was never going to achieve my dreams or my goals. So I came to the point to recognize that when I reach that point on my journey that I believe that I'm not capable, and I want to turn back and go back to the people that will hold me in their arms and go, "It's okay, little Barry, you're okay." That's the point that I need to continue forward more than any other moment in my decision-making process. That's the moment that I have to push through. When my mind and my narrative says, "You can't, you don't want this, give it up, this isn't worth it." Those are false narratives that are defeated, that lead to defeatism when you're being tested under the heat of the trials of life, while you're trying to achieve a goal that you want for yourself. So my whole life was full of failure. Every one of the moments in my life, from moving to I mean, I could go through a long list. Moving to Hollywood, working for Animal Planet, moving to Italy with my wife, making films in Italy, going to the Himalayas. The Himalayas was full of failure, was full of mishaps. I had to go back. I had videographers, I had guys that were coming to film, they couldn't make it. Their visas got rejected. I had to shoot the first year on my own. I had invested all this money and time, and I didn't even come away with what I wanted. I had to go back. Most people would have given up. I had to raise funds again and go back to overcome the trials. So yes, tons of failure, tons of times when I wanted to turn back. And I often talk about this thing called the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is a storytelling tool by Joseph Campbell. And just a quick summary of it is, the hero, we're all our own heroes in a sense. And the hero in any given story is that iconic figure. And I always use the example of Lord of the Rings because everyone knows Frodo. The call to action, the crossing the threshold, meeting your friends, foes, and enemies, and then ultimately coming to the abyss. The abyss is that space where you're on your own, you're left alone, and all the skills that you developed prior to that moment are left to you to employ so that you can make it to the other side. And when you make it to the other side, you will be transformed, much like the butterfly from the caterpillar, that spot where you are being changed. And so, so yeah, for me, a lot of my life, just to wrap that up, full of failure, but it was about learning the skills of overcoming failure and not seeing failure as the moment where it's time to give up, but seeing failure as the challenge to keep going forward, to find my way to the other side. And that was how I overcame those failures, but full of failure.
Okay. Yeah, and then sometimes there are moments when it's time to say goodbye to a project. So I also had to at some point move through that experience, right? But it's not like if something doesn't work out immediately, it's always a good idea to do that. Uh, we learn so much from those experiences, even if it's sometimes just a huge mindset shift.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have an external lesson, a practical lesson, so to speak, and a mindset lesson, and sometimes we have one of the two, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
It's interesting what you say, like there comes both what you learn from your experience and then knowing when to let go of a project.
Mhm.
That's as an artist, that's always challenging. It's hard to know. It's hard to know when to let go, you know? How do you know when to let go? Have you figured that out for yourself?
Well, I had one specific case, when the expenses and the cost of the business were just no longer, it didn't make sense to keep the business open. It was a brick and mortar business in the past. I had a fraudulent business partner, which, it's a long story, but after which after finding out it didn't make sense to keep it open very long. I tried, but it depended too much on that person's name. So, at some point I had to make that very tough decision to say, look, everything I've built, even the whole build out of a house, I have to let it go, which was
Mm,
not an easy decision to make. And it wasn't one that I made from one day to the next, just giving up. I just had to, at some point, look the truth. We talked about the truth before in the
yeah.
eye and say, look, it's just not gonna work out. And yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because in my response, I kind of gave this rah-rah motif of just keep going forward. But I do think there are times when you need to turn back. And what you're saying is relevant, and I think it's very important. And knowing when it's time to turn back. I'm currently working on a project right now, and sometimes it's a new book. It's highlighting the film behind me, the Empty America. I'm kind of writing the story of that experience, and I kind of wonder if it's time to turn back. There's times. Is this topic relevant anymore to people? Do people care about learning about an experience during the pandemic? So many people have moved on, and yet at the same time it was so profound that I feel like I should keep going forward. So it's interesting that you say that because I think is that failure turning back? Maybe sometimes it's not. For you it sounds like no.
You know, I think it's actually never back. It's always forward. It's just forward in a different direction.
Mm,
And it's a decision. Any decision could be right or wrong. It's just about what is it for you, right?
mm.
And so sometimes we just need to make a decision and then we move maybe in a different direction or we carry on in the same direction. So there's nothing right or wrong about it. To me, it actually took me to that next business and it took me to move from Brazil to New York City. Now I did love Rio de Janeiro for sure. It's a beautiful place. I hadn't planned to move without that experience, but it's what I decided to do. So yeah, and in hindsight, there's always like huge learning. There's huge transformation in those experiences if we use them for that purpose, right? We can also not use them for transformation and instead lament ourselves, which then, of course, isn't as useful. And there is oftentimes a moment of that, but the important thing is to move out of that moment, out of that victimhood and into a more self-empowering mindset. And really then, just think about what's next. And actually, without moving out of victim mode and out of this, I was defrauded and this lamenting mode, it's actually hard to move forward. So that's also a decision I had to make.
It sounds, no, I'm with you. I think that you're accurate. It sounds a little bit like you are a relativist. Do you endorse relativism at some level? It sounds, when I hear you say there is no right or wrong, are you a genuine relativism? I am
Yeah.
relativist?
No, what I'm just saying is there is no judgment about the decision, because the decision, a decision that can seem completely right to me could be completely wrong to you in your
Yeah,
mind, right? And
right.
sometimes also that's why we say make the decision when it's a life-changing decision. For example, you got to make it with your heart and not so much with your mind, because your logical mind doesn't always give the decision that is maybe best for you, because
Yeah.
there is no way to really make a logical decision of, am I staying here or do I move somewhere else, right? I mean, you could make a pro and con list, but has that ever worked for you? For me, never. So,
It's
I
funny
mean,
that you say that.
yeah,
I have made many pro and con lists.
interesting.
In the end of the day, I throw them away.
Yeah,
But I think they're relative. I do think they're useful so that you know what you're saying yes or what you're saying no to. You may not impact your decision because I can't make
yeah.
decisions. I'm with you.
Mhm.
I'm with you. I can't make decisions based purely on rational thought. Not every decision is rational, but I think it's worth taking the time and sitting down and going, recently we talked about leaving Florida and moving north to Michigan, where I grew up. And I made a list of positives and negatives. And for my business, it looked like it made more sense to go north. But for my lifestyle, it made more sense to stay in Florida.
Mhm.
And so if I was making a decision based on money, I would go north. If I was making a decision based on lifestyle, I would stay south. Well, we decided we're going to stick it out here a little bit longer. Things have started to come together. Um, but it was good to know that, even though it really didn't change the outcome. So I think there's value in kind of that a little bit, but I'm hearing you. What you're saying makes sense. It can't be all rational. It can't be all
Right.
right. And I think at the end of the day, it has to be led by your heart, or your spirit, or the nature that you feel drawn to. Because the people that make only rational decisions, I think they end up unsatisfied at some level.
Right. So that's one piece of it. So yes, I'm not trying to convince anybody to never use rationalism, right? Or never use a logical mind. It has its function and its place for sure. What I have found also, even when making the lists, and you might want to try that one day, Barry, to me, it's more useful to make pro and pro lists than pro and con lists. So if I have two options, I make a pro list for one option and a pro list for the other. Doesn't give me exactly the logical decision either, but to me personally, it's a bit more helpful.
It's interesting you say that. I just spoke with someone yesterday that said there's research that says that 80% of our decisions, or 80% of our mind, leans towards negative. 18% is neutral and 2% is positive. So what you say makes sense because your mind naturally dra- gravitates towards the negatives, the cons. So if you're making a pro list, you're saying focus on the positives, focus on the 2%, which usually brings you the most joy, right? So I'm with you on that. I would agree. I think that's a smart decision, 100%.
I also like to focus more on solution finding than on problem solving. I just think it opens up possibility. Whereas if we talk about problem solving, we are boxed into that. Okay, there's this one. Oftentimes we automatically or subconsciously think that there are fewer solutions. When I
Mm.
look for solutions, then my mind goes in a different direction. So these are just a couple of
I love that
examples.
because all that problem solving is finding solutions. So what you're saying is you're just changing, and we talked about this a little offline, where it's
Yep.
the language that you use and the power of language, how it shapes your mind and your perception of things. And so yeah, I mean, it's just a great way to think of it. It's like, well, they're both doing the same things, but let's focus on solution solving, not problem solving, right?
And
I
you
like
said
that.
the key word here, the focus changes.
Yeah, it
That's
does change.
focus, right? So the focus changes. Yeah. And that's also why I really don't really use the word pandemic, because I personally haven't seen one in my lifetime and I'm 61 years old. So I'm just
Yes.
using
Well,
different
no,
words.
and I pandemic, I'm fine with that term.
Uh-huh.
And I'm glad that you kind of opened this up, and if we can talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
it,
I would
only
love to
from
actually touch on Empty America if you don't mind, very
yeah,
soon
no,
too. So,
no, yeah, I'll let me address that, and I'll be happy
yeah.
to give a summary of that, and we can open it up. Or I'm pointing at the wrong side. It's this side over here. But I think it's funny that you say that. I like to lead people toward my ideas. And sometimes I feel like if I use the terminology of the mainstream, I'm not running them away. And then I begin to explain to them my perspective on their terminology. So I try to redefine their terminology. My concern with using the term plandemic is instantly I turn off a large portion of the audience. Instantly they go, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. Oh, he's one
Mhm.
of those guys. He doesn't believe that this thing happened, blah, blah, blah. And they shut off to me. And I want them to stay turned on while I help bring them to my side. And as they come to my side, I'll introduce them to you, and you can talk to them about the plandemic.
I love it. Yeah, I usually say lockdown to keep it neutral because everybody knows what that.
Yeah, it was a lockdown. It was a lockdown. And so,
So,
just to kind of talk about what you kind of brought out,
yeah.
setting behind me is the poster of a short documentary that I made called Empty America. And what it was in 2020, in March of 2020, 1 month after the state, by just to be accurate, it wasn't a national lockdown in America. The federal government recommended it, and states had the power to do it or not do it. And I think upwards of 48 states locked down initially, or maybe even 49. I think the only one that didn't was either South Dakota. I think it was South Dakota, which kudos to South Dakota for having the courage and the governor at that time. But so the national lockdown orders came. We were living in Michigan. I thought the whole thing felt suspect to me. I'd worked in marketing and media my entire life. It was so well organized, so well orchestrated. I had watched what came of the post 9/11 propaganda. I had watched how we moved into Iraq just irrationally on the basis of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. And I watched how succinctly the media collaborated across all networks to get us there. And I saw this happening again during COVID. And I said, this whole thing is suspect. And I left my home with my family, risking our lives, mind you. At that time, we would be risking our lives to answer the question, what is happening? And the experience of driving around the country was profound. And originally, the goal was just to go out to Moab, Utah, where I could regroup in the desert of Utah, because I used to do commercials for Jeep, and we would go out to Moab, Utah to 4x4 and off road. It's a beautiful, amazing open space with slick rock, and they love to take trucks out there to 4x4. And I knew that space so well, and it's so huge. I was told my wife, let's go out there. Something about that place I was attracted to. Let's take a minute from this. We're locked at home. I can't go to work. I can't do my business. And so we drove with that as our main destination. And while I was on my course, I drove through the city of Chicago and Minneapolis with zero traffic. I crossed town after town and watched just the sheer panic and fear on people's faces as I would check into hotels. And I had a couple of interactions with people that kept driving me forward, that kept asking me to want to learn more. And once we got to the Mojave Desert, there was a part of me that just said I want to keep going. And I asked my wife, and she agreed. And we ended up going out to Los Angeles, again empty of traffic, people, beaches closed down. Las Vegas, which was a ghost town, a literal ghost town, because Las Vegas is only there in spirit. It's a spirit of entertainment. It's an entertainment town, and when serious problems come, that town is empty. And that was this kind of the weirdest place I went to, and ultimately that my journey led me literally into my son had to go to the bathroom. And this is the crux of my book, and I don't talk about it enough on the film. By the way, the film, which played in festivals internationally, got 18 best documentary shorts in 18 films, and it was accepted into upwards of 36 festivals, and it was well received, and it was an unbiased perspective of the nation as I filmed the beauty of America without people in it, and played the narrative of both left and right politically. I had AM radio, and I had NPR, and I had Fox, and I had MSNBC, all radio stations, not television stations, all sound bites. And I played it I tried to balance it out unbiasedly across the board. And it went on the festivals and did great. It was suppressed in an unprecedented period of censorship across all channels. It was labeled as COVID content. Few people were able to see it. Even today, people have a hard time seeing it. I even posted a comment recently on a site, and they immediately took it down. Still today, it's not a controversial piece. But when I entered, but what I was getting at is, as I crossed the desert, my son had to go to the bathroom. He was 6 years old at the time. And when my son has to go to the bathroom at that time, you couldn't waste time. You need to either pull off the road or get to the first exit. So we weren't far from an exit. We saw an exit. It was in the middle of the Mojave Desert, literally nothing around as far as you can see. The Mojave is just empty. We had just come out of Death Valley. And I pulled the first exit, and I was pulling the first exit. I saw in the distance what appeared to be a tank parked out in the desert. And I, like you, being an adventurous soul and a curious person, I was like, I want to see this tank. My son can go to the bathroom in the desert, and I can see the tank. And maybe he'll dig the tank too. He's a young boy. Boys like these things. And I kind of pulled off, went through a crack in the fence, went on a 2-track trail that was dirt, pulled up to this place. And while we all got out and my son took care of business, I pulled into this place called Liberty Sculpture Park. And it's a monument to Tiananmen Square. And Tiananmen Square, I think the year was 1989, when the Communist Party moved across China and took over China, converting it to communism, and overthrew a liberal democratic party in the city of Tiananmen Square. And it was a monument to the Tiananmen Square massacre. And there in front of me was the tank and the famous picture of the student with a briefcase standing in front of the tank, bringing halt to the communist movement for only a second that we all remember, in an age where we as Americans were clear on the conflict between democracy and communism. Since then, we've employed NAFTA. We've decided to partner with the Communist Party, and we're seeing that communist movement push in to every part of our lives and the world. And we're kind of turning a blind eye to the dangers. I can't believe that people haven't seen throughout history the dangers of centralized government. There's this idea that it's going to improve your life. And it's problematic in this day and age because we're seeing the greed of capitalism on a level that's never been seen before. So the problem is we have a and not to focus on the problem, what's the solution? But the problem is we have capital greed that's dark. And the solution people are looking for is how do we get away from that dark capital greed? And that's accountability. But our leaders are not holding our citizens accountable anymore. So the revolution that is we're vulnerable to is that of communism. And so while I entered into this space and I was kind of taking this in and thinking about what's important and having traveled through America, which at that time seemed like it was completely under suppression of total authoritarianism, the lockdown, the mandates, the masks were rolling out. The single solution was on its way with a vaccine coming in the near future. And all this was on the radio running through my head. And as I was standing there, I turned and I saw this fence. And on this fence, written in white play cards, was the terms, beware of the CCP virus, beware of the communist flu. People today people on this might say I'm have feelings on that statement. They might, at the time there was all this conversation of xenophobia. This has nothing to do with Chinese citizens. This has everything to do with the use of chemical warfare and the nefarious nature that it was placed upon the globe for people in power to kind of achieve an agenda. Now, I'll stop there because people are going to begin to wonder what was the agenda, but that's the primary basis of it. And from that moment, I felt I'm nobody. I'm not, nobody knows me. I'm not that impactful of an individual. I'm just a small town boy from a small country town in Michigan. I'm not a professor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a politician, and I'm not even that great of a journalist. But at that moment, I was called to action. Speaking of our call to action in our hero's journey, to look into this more and to seek accountability for the people that were responsible for this, and to call action to people not to forget this moment, because it will repeat itself. It will come back. This isn't the last, even though we're in this kind of dead zone and people are like moving on with life, it's out there now. And for me, it was a clear call to action. And I stood there thinking, alone in the desert with only my family, thinking the world should see this. Immigrants found that know China better than I did, traveled out to the desert to write this message as a warning to people to be wary of the power of centralized government and its nefarious nature at a place where the Communist Party rolled over democracy, killing people in the massacre of Tiananmen Square. And so for me, it was a call to action. And from that, I've been working on a book, but the film itself doesn't go into the depth that I just went into, but it does capture the essence of, it's a time capsule of what we went through during the lockdowns. And so that's the piece, and that's kind of a kickoff to a call to action that I'm not sure where it's going to lead me, but I am on the journey as we speak.
Yes, and thanks for the very important warning. Many say it was just a test, right? So it was definitely not done. That's the message. So yeah, and I can so relate to the title, Empty America, because during those lockdowns, well, first of all, I went to Mexico. So like you, I left New York City and I said, I am out of here. Right. So while I never did the lockdown, never played along, and I was the one walking outside, but I felt like I just didn't know what else was going to come, and I didn't want to be a part of it. So I took a plane to Mexico, first of all, but then I came back after a few months, and I think it was like end of May, beginning of June. And then it was still like that, right? New York City was ghost town. I was walking, I was one of the very few, I sometimes saw nobody walking in the empty subway tunnels of New York City, at Times Square and Bryant Park, Broadway. You mentioned Las Vegas earlier, right? And I'd take sometimes part of the time I was staying in New Jersey because I had given up my apartment. So I'd take a bus to New Jersey occasionally from a deserted Port Authority station where usually 225,000 people or so pass through on a regular workday every single day, right? On a weekday. And at the time, the entire area around Port Authority looked like ghost town, totally spooky. The only people I'd meet were oftentimes homeless people because where else should they be going, right? So that title, man, I lived that. So yeah,
Well,
totally.
the compliance for me was profound. I think the
Yeah.
thing that I was trying to answer when I first left and when I started to see it, and by the way, I also traversed to New York. We went through the Jersey Tunnel. We captured Times Square. We captured Bryant Park. We captured what you said, Wall Street Station at rush hour, completely empty. All that is captured on film, and Penn Station, etc.
Maybe I'm in
And
it.
you might be. I captured all the main hubs of I captured all the main hubs of New York within 30 minutes at rush hour.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I
That's
believe you.
literally crazy. That's literally crazy. The rate at which I could travel through. But the biggest question for me, and the thing that was profoundly strange, was the general compliance on a grand scale that I couldn't even comprehend. I remember standing in Los Angeles. I used to play ball on Venice Beach. I used to play basketball weekly, almost daily at Venice Beach. And Venice Beach, like what you just mentioned, was another one of those places that attracts 200,000 tourists a day, completely empty. And I remember standing there and near one of the kind of squares there, a guy on a bike where people used to entertain and gather screamed out at the top of his lungs. And I don't know who he was screaming it to. He didn't look at me. He didn't even probably realize I was there. He just said, "Do you see what happens when nobody reads a book anymore?" Right? And that sounds like a silly statement unless I help translate it for your audience. And what he was saying was there's a lack of nuance. There's a lack of your interpretation of what's happening. There is a conformity that's so profound and so unique in this age of social media that I couldn't even put my finger on. And people to this day, because so many people conformed and so few people have looked at this and addressed it because they've accepted the narrative. They took the vaccine. They went forward with the propaganda, and they don't want to look back because the vaccine was, talk about the hero's journey. And in the hero's journey, it almost always starts out with clinking drinks and having a drink together. That's the bond. The vaccine was the bond
Hmm.
between that community. And because of that, there is a bond that they share that they don't want to go back and address. There's almost a PTSD. My father struggled from PTSD. He's served in the Vietnam War, and I could go into that more in detail. But I bring that up to say I saw him change throughout his entire life because of one moment that went unaddressed. He's never addressed one moment where he was caught in a firefight, and it has impacted his entire life. Because of the PTSD, a moment can impact your entire life, the direction of your life. And if you don't deal with it, you will continue forward with your life changed, almost unaware of it. And that, for me, is what happened. And that's why so few people will face it. And so few people understand when I say the pure conformity is mind-boggling. And that moment where that guy yells out about reading a book, what he was saying was there's no nuance. You're not interpreting the world through your own lens anymore. And the book means that no one reads the same book. Everyone reads a different book. And that's the premise of that statement. But everyone was reading the same book during COVID, and it was kind of freaky. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's where the risk is, right? When you not questioning. I always say question everything. My word too. I mean, you have no reason to just believe me. And I think that brings us back to leadership and also observing leaders or so-called leaders who didn't really stand up, even if they knew that there was something not right, who wouldn't dare stand up for their values, right? So that was something also that was interesting to observe in that context of leadership.
Well,
Whether
I think
that's
what you
in all areas, really, in corporate, everywhere.
well, I think what you're saying as a leader, be comfortable with being questioned. And as a follower or as a person working under leadership, get comfortable with questioning leadership. Leaders should be comfortable with being questioned because that's part of the process and it refines their answers. And they don't have to have all the answers. And a leader that feels like they have to have all the answers is an insecure leader. And he doesn't want to be questioned because he feels like he has to have all the answers.
Right.
Nobody has all the
Exactly.
answers. And for the
Yes.
followers, have empathy for your leaders because they don't have all the answers. And part of coming to the solution is asking questions and working through problems. And that goes, and I think the theme of our podcast could be summed up in that in a sense. We talked about truth and how we dissect truth and how we have to work together with truth. That could be considered solution solving. We work together on the solution. Even though you're the leader and you're in charge, we're working together. And I'm going to question, and you're going to work with me to come to that. And then you're going to lead us once we have come to an answer towards the direction we want to go. And so I think that sums up all of what we've been talking about in a capsule at some level and a process that you and I have been kind of going through in our time together.
Right, right. And the other aspect that I meant to bring up through my comment earlier was that there's responsibility in leadership. You know, it's also that responsibility to question or to stand up for what you maybe even know is something to stand up against or for, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so one quick question before we close it out, and actually I did want to quickly also mention the your more recent project. The can you just remind me the adventure, the
Crossing
unknown
lines.
adventurer?
Oh, The Unknown Adventurer, my book, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, my book, a lot of the stories that I've told during this podcast are in my book. The
Mm-hmm.
book is called The Unknown Adventurer, a story of living big, dreaming big, and learning from failure. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Nobles. But you can also find it on my website, and you can get a free e-copy if you're listening to this podcast. Make sure that you add that you're listening to the Regina Huber podcast, the TYP, Transform Your Performance. Put that in the notes, but you can get a free e-copy if you go to endlessmedia1.com. That's the number one, the numerical number one, endlessmedia1.com. And click on the book. You'll see in the drop-down menu a free book. Enter in your information. Put this podcast in the notes, and I'll send you a free e-copy for yourself to read and learn about.
Yeah, so just put either my name, Regina Huber, or TYP, which is the company abbreviation transform, or just the podcast name, which might be easier, Rise to Lead, because that
Any
might be
of
easier for
those
some
that
of our
let me know,
listeners.
yeah, any
Yeah,
that let me know that they heard it from your podcast would be valuable.
great. That's very generous. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I know there are a ton of other topics we could be talking about, like collaboration and changing teams. I'm sure you have a lot of changes going on in your teams as you work on the different projects, but maybe we can, so unless you want to add something about that, we could also maybe just come on a second time, some other time.
Yeah, no, this is great. I've loved this. I feel like we've got a really strong message in here. I hope people have kind of heard some of the different pieces that we dissected, and I think that there's some takeaways as well. So this has been awesome.
Thank you so much. And I'm saying the same. Thank you for having a candid conversation here with me. I love those. And we will definitely put your most important links in the description to this episode. You mentioned one already, and you mentioned your books that people can find on Amazon. Is there any other place that you would like to mention before we say goodbye?
Nope, I think endlessmedia1.com is the spot. Go check it out, and you'll find a lot of info on me, and you'll find my documentaries there. You'll find my company there. You'll find all the pieces, my social media links, and so you can find everything you need to connect with me there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Barry, for coming on, and thanks to everybody, as always, for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you like this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.